Greetings, comrades. Let me state the facts as plainly as I can. It looks like we're all fucked. Europe is fucked, and possibly the rest of the world as well. Now that I've gained your attention, let me try and look at the nuts and bolts of this European crisis. Essentially, we're facing another recession. It's going to be bigger, nastier, and more dreadful than the last one. We've all known it was coming, communist and capitalist alike. None of us truly believed the soothing words of politicians and Eurocrats. None of us believed that China was really going to come and help. After all, they've got their own crisis brewing. At least they've got a thicker layer of propaganda to cover it up than Europe ever dreamed of. None of us viewed the occasional upward pointing green arrows on the financial section of the news with anything but scepticism. We are all mentally prepared for the degeneration of the economic and political system in Europe and possibly elsewhere. And I stress degeneration. Will capitalism collapse in the next decade? Well, capitalism as Adam Smith and co envisioned it hasn't really existed for a long time. The stateless libertarian capitalist weirdos have that much correct. Their true capitalism is essentially illusionary, however. That's just the way capitalism develops and degenerates. We're at point A, and they have no realistic strategy in their briefcases to bring us to their mythical point B. Still, observe their critiques of the current economists and economic system, for wisdom does occasionally flow forth from it. Still, take it with a pinch of salt. That's all I plan to say about anarcho-capitalism for now. I oppose it. I'll save any attempt for debunking it for another day. So no, it will not collapse. It will degenerate. And it will continue to degenerate in the way Lenin observed that it already had in his day. Perhaps into a new and darker stage. Before I explore this degeneration, however, let me give some updates on what's actually been going on in Europe over the last, week or so. This is certainly long overdue, but as I all too often have to explain, I'm tired, working, I have no free time, etc, etc. Still, George Papandreou, the Greek Prime Minister, has essentially been deposed. He was probably the least powerful leader of any country, except, Fiji. But Papandreou's wavering, reluctance, nervousness, and with regards to his aborted referendum attempt on EU membership, erraticness, has proven too much for the Eurocrats to stomach any longer. On the 10th of November he finally resigned, replaced, unelected of course, with a so-called technocrat, Lucas Papademos, the former governor of the Bank of Greece from 1994 to 2002, and vice president of the European Central Bank from 2002 to 2010. A banker, a bureaucrat, a stooge of the EU and the IMF. His mission is to impose the edicts of the EU and the IMF, made in the name of bourgeois interests of course, i.e. at this point survival, upon the workers of Greece, and to soothe the markets, meaning that he will likely coldly carry out the commands of the European bureaucracy and not do anything to make the markets shit themselves. While the corruption in the Greek political and economic system may well be swept away by this new robot national unity government, it's only with a view to forcing through the savage austerity upon Greek society more efficiently than Papandreou's socialist government. And the fact that he is the EU's man will likely give him a free hand in dealing with the inevitable surge of working class aggression his government will surely face. Expect violence. Next came Italy. The economic crisis brewing and the Milan Stock Exchange fluctuating with each new statement from Berlusconi, wavering on whether or not he'd resign, Italy was reaching the condition in which the former Celtic tiger Ireland was forced to ask for a bailout. To quote the Weekly Worker, ever since the August letter to the Italian government signed by Mario Draghi and Jean-Claude Trichet on behalf of the European Central Bank, Berlusconi's Bonapartist regime, which often ignored the tenets of neoliberal orthodoxy in favour of a corrupt and clientistic populism, enriching parts of its petty bourgeois mass base, as well as a number of shady entrepreneurs close to organised crime, has been replaced by what is in effect an ECB protectorate. Berlusconi's October 26th letter, setting out a detailed timetable for reforms and delivered to the EU leaders a week before the G20, was not a spontaneous programme for action collectively devised by the Italian cabinet. Indeed, Finance Minister Giulio Tremonti gave a very public signs of disavowing it. But a document written and rewritten in accordance with telephone instructions from officials in Brussels under the guidance of Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy. The duo had clearly demonstrated their obvious lack of trust in Berlusconi on October the 23rd, with their uncontrollable public smirking when asked by journalists about their faith in the Italian Premier's promises, an incident seen on television all over the world, even if Berlusconi managed to prevent it from being shown on the major Italian television channels. End quote. As a side note, what they're referring to when they say that he ignored neoliberal orthodoxy is he did not sweep away the the labour laws gained by the Italian workers in the late 60s in the way that Thatcher swept away all Britain's labour and union laws, all gains that the workers had made during her time. Now, he remained solidly in denial at the G20 conference in Cannes, which is now regarded to have been an utter failure and a fiasco, claiming that Italy, the third largest economy in the Eurozone, wasn't feeling the crisis. Still, the conference resulted in Italy being thrown in with Greece under ECB and IMF economic domination. Berlusconi submitted dutifully, but was kicked to the curb anyway. His presence was too much for the markets to bear. He is set to be replaced by Mario Monti, former European Commissioner, advisor to Goldman Sachs and Coca-Cola. A money man, a technocrat and a stooge with an ambition for a centralised European capitalism. Italy's debt is 1.9 trillion euros and growing, and should hit the fan, only the ECB, the European Central Bank, and the IMF, International Monetary Fund for those who don't know, would be able to assist. While aid to the IMF is set to increase, including Britain's, which may in fact quadruple, non-Eurozone countries are extremely reluctant to bail out this European crisis, meaning that the European Central Bank may have to bear the responsibility. But this is not as easy as it sounds. Germany's government, one of the strongest economically in the EU, is not keen for the ECB to weigh in as a lender of last resort or as a pan-European national bank, as a bailout of the tottering economies of Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and possibly others, such as Austria, which might creep towards crisis, would be extremely costly, and the process would involve what's known as quantitative easing, inflation being allowed to soar, which would surely result in austerity, rising prices, falling living conditions, social instability, strikes, unemployment, and God knows what else. The European Financial Stability Facility does not have the funds to buy Italy and the EU out of this crisis. Half its funds are already put towards Ireland, Portugal and Greece, which look like small beer compared to the giant, well, it's like a nuclear bomb in economic terms, which is the Italian crisis. And its plans to beef up its capabilities are looked upon with scepticism by the markets, if only due to basically the complete secrecy surrounding it, i.e. there probably isn't really a plan, it's all talk. Economies all over Europe are sinking, some faster than others, but sinking nonetheless. And comrades are already fully aware of what this entails. The vaguest possibility of a way out from the bourgeois point of view would be a much greater and firmer centralisation of Europe economically and therefore politically and with regards to policing and security. I couldn't actually find the paper, but I read in the Morning Star a little article. They were talking about kind of a pan-European police force for dealing with massive, well, which could be used to deal with massive demonstrations, quelling of public unrest, which kind of reminds me of the Tsar using Cossacks that didn't speak Russian to shoot workers protesting in the streets of Petrograd. So, I don't know. And in this kind of centralised Europe, Germany and France would presumably take leading roles. And this, of course, would be a potentially catastrophic blow not only to democracy but to social stability itself in Europe. As Jerome E. Roos of Raw Mag writes, the most shocking thing, perhaps, is that our leaders are not even trying to hide it anymore. European officials now openly admit their intentions. To calm the markets, politics as usual has to be suspended. As the unelected president of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, bluntly stated during a lecture in Florence last week, Italy needs reforms, not elections. Apparently the time for window dressing is over. Markets rule, and that's that. End quote. From my perspective, however, the markets are almost like animals in nature. The aim of the technocracy in Italy and Greece is to make them purr and not hiss. so we see green arrows pointing up and not red ones pointing down. The term dictatorship of the bourgeoisie has always been literal, but never so visibly in Europe as it is now. Well, at least not since the fall of fascism, etc. The facade of democracy seems to just get in the way, it seems. Still, the hopes of the bourgeoisie reviving Europe anytime soon are slim, a decade of stagnation seeming much more likely, the technocracy serving only to keep the engine running until the wheels of capitalism start moving again. Stagnation, a word conjuring up images of the Eastern Bloc poverty, bread queues, production quotas, misery, and all of this of course runs counter to the logic of capitalism, which calls for continuous growth and expansion. The system, political and economic, has degenerated, and will likely continue to do so for a long time if left to the bourgeoisie. But right now, the working class will probably not take power. It's disorganised, confused, disunited on an international level. It is stirring, and it will take lots and lots of hard work, lots of explaining, arguing, fighting, debating, striking, unionising, and frustration before it properly awakens. And this task we set ourselves today, so fascism doesn't do it for us tomorrow. I needn't get into that, you'll know what to look out for. Are there any solutions out there? Well, Keynesian doesn't seem to be on the table. The most comrades of mine who regularly read the bourgeois financial papers, saying that a few journalists are suggesting it, but they're apparently quite fringe. You've got sort of some social democratic politicians are suggesting less cuts and less deep cuts, but that's not Keynesianism. China, well, I think it's worth me doing a video on China, because I've been going to a lot of seminars that my communist group has been holding, and kind of learned a lot about that situation, and a lot of it's recorded, luckily, so I'll put a link to some of those recordings on the in the description box, and you can check that out. So right now there doesn't seem to be an immediate solution. This is something that we can't stop it from happening. It's going to happen, and we have to survive it, and we have to continue fighting against it. We have to organise and educate, basically. Educate, from the Latin to mean to lead out, and that's what we'll have to do. We'll have to lead people out if we can. Now, in a video I did a little while ago about whether or not we should leave the EU, I kind of noted some disquiet at the idea of kind of if Europe if Europe turned to shit, if the economic system collapsed, it would be beneficial to the far left. And I don't really think this is true anymore, as history has shown that A tends to often benefit the far right much more, even though, both the KKE on the far left with their autarkic kind of Albania program doesn't offer a solution, and the far right nationalist parties, which basically to an extent will only offer the same thing but with a different cultural dressing, autarky won't work. It will just starve countries to death. It has to, it has to remain able to trade with other countries to get the resources it needs at this point in time. So that's the situation I see as I see it. How long will it last? Will it spread to Portugal or Ireland? Will it be overthrown by the people, or will it in fact save capitalism from itself, at least for a little while? Well, I'm too sleepy to venture an answer for that right now, but tonight from the great governing halls of Paris and Berlin and into the ears of Greek Italians ring the rallying cry of bourgeois capitalism. Vive la République! Vive la technocratie! And perhaps we should come up with our own rallying slogan. Maybe a couple of years down the line it will be all power to the Soviets, long live Marxism. Or maybe we should adopt the rallying slogan of Nestor Manko and the anarcho-communists of Ukraine. Death to all those who stand in the way of freedom for the working people. Red salutes, comrades.